Hi everyone, in this video we're going to go over the basic structure of a neuron. Alright, so let's get started. This one's going to be a pretty short video because the neuron is actually pretty simple. Even though it has a lot of functions, it's actually a pretty simple structure. Alright, so let's get started. First, this is an animated version of a neuron, right? So there are a few notable features here. First, are these branched structures, right? So in the previous video about glial cells, you heard of a cell called an oligodendrocyte. In that, we heard the word dendro, which basically means like a tree, right? And we also learned that cyte is the word for a cell. So quite literally, what this structure is called is a dendrocyte. So what is a dendrocyte? A dendrocyte is the receiving end of information. So let's write that out. Receiving end of information. All right. So each one of these dendrocytes receives information from the axon. So an axon is this structure right here, right? So this structure starting from this point all the way, let's continue drawing. My writing pad is really small, so I have to restart at a certain point. This is what's known as an axon, right? So an axon is the part of neuron that transmits information. That transmits. Okay, so now what you're probably curious about, actually, let's make this line, no, it's fine, okay. So in this axon, let me use a different color because it's getting all muddled. You have these small branches, right, in it. Notice, so what are they called? So these are actually called your axon terminals, right? Your terminals are these little spots that are here. So axon terminals. So each axon terminal makes a connection with one dendritic branch. Okay, so what the heck is a dendritic branch? We don't know what a dendritic branch is, right? So let's go back to the dendrites again. So on each dendrite, there are small protrusions that come out like this, and they're really, really microscopic. So these are called dendritic branches. So what do they even do? So these act as tiny microphones for signals. For signals. And basically what they do is they search for signals and they reach out for them. So we'll go over this when we cover chapter 8, I think, of the Brain Facts book, but there are a few different types of dendritic branches, and they're actually very fundamental for learning. Now let's get to the fundamentals of this, right? So basically, these fundamentals are, first of all, this section, this little piece, which is common in every single nerve cell, right? So there's your nucleus, which obviously processes information that comes in. Then what this part here, let's switch colors. This little part here, this circular structure that surrounds the cell body, or this kind of thing where the dendrites are coming out of, so that I think would be a better circle representing. Let's draw the full circle. Sorry, guys. Here we go. So that structure is what is called your cell body. So this contains the cytoplasm, which is basically a jelly-like structure which holds all the cell organelles. So things like the mitochondria, which basically produce energy for the cell. And so let's write that out. Actually, mitochondria, it's known as the powerhouse of the cell. Chondria. I'm spelling that wrong. Chondria. And the cytoplasm, mitochondria, and other cell organelles. Cell organelles are basically nothing but different parts that give it energy or take out waste, all of that stuff, right? So that's what the cell body holds. It also includes the nucleus. So that's what a really important term is, right? So there's something known as the soma, which is nothing but the nucleus plus the cell body. More generally speaking, when a neuroscientist or anyone is referring to a soma, they're referring to this middle section right here, right? This whole section, including the nucleus. So now let's take a look at how information would be processed in a neuron, right? So basically, these structures that I was about to start drawing here was supposed to be the axon or the axon terminals of a neuron, right? Like here, like so. Yeah, so sorry. Basically, what these are basically your dendritic branches, which are reaching out. So let's use a different color here. Let's say we'll use red because we use red here, right? So these dendritic branches are listening out for any possible signals that are coming in. And they sense this axon, right? Say this branch senses this axon. So what will happen is for the signal to pass from this axon to the dendritic branch, there's actually a really, really small gap between them, which is called, let's use a different color. I actually find that colors help me remember more, so that's why I keep switching colors. So that small gap is called synaptic cleft. So what's really important to understand here is that in a neuron, the information, the axon is not directly attached to a dendritic branch. It actually is more or less jumps. The signal jumps from one side to another, or more accurately put, it's actually converted into another signal. So you may have heard of something called neurotransmission. Let me just give you a brief understanding of it, right? Let me write it out completely. Basically, when you've heard of that electrical currents travel through a neuron, right? But what actually happens? How is it transmitted? So the electrical signal gets converted, right? So how does it get converted? Basically, it reaches the synaptic cleft or synaptic, here, let's write that out. Cleft. It's also known as a synaptic terminal, but I'm pretty sure the Brain Facts book calls it the synaptic terminal. So if you hear synaptic cleft, synaptic terminal, it's referring to that little gap. And it's a very, very microscopic gap. It's like 1,000th of a nanometer or something like that. So then what happens is once it reaches the synaptic cleft, the presynaptic neuron, or the neuron that's transmitting information to the other. So let's draw a small diagram here, right? And this is the axon of N1, neuron 1, and this is the dendrite of neuron 2. This little gap here is the synaptic cleft. And what happens is once the electrical signal reaches the axon terminal, it releases these small pouches of things called neurotransmitters. So these are chemical structures or little chemical things that attach to receptors. So let's draw those receptors in black here. That attach to these receptors, which open electrical currents in the dendrites. It opens electrical currents which go to the cell body of neuron 2 or the soma where the information is processed, right? So it says basically the sum of all the currents that comes from every single dendrite in the neuron is added together. So you add them all together, and what happens is the neuron has a certain threshold, right? So, yes, the signals are coming in. Yes, the sum is happening. And in that, there are also two different types of signals that we'll go over in the next video. So, say this is the threshold for it to fire. The resting potential is negative 70 millimeters. So, I'm pretty sure the potential is 50 millivolts, right? It has to reach 50 millivolts for the neuron to fire. So basically say that the stimulus, basically the sum of inhibitory and excitatory. So basically inhibitory are signals that reduce the threshold, and excitatory are the signals that increase the threshold. So this is not a very accurate representation, but it really helped me to understand the concept. Think about excitatory as promoting it or a positive, and think about inhibitory as a negative signal. So the collective sum of them should exceed the threshold of the neuron, and once it exceeds it, an action potential is generated. So let's write that out here. Action potential. Okay, let's ignore the 50 millivolt threshold because I actually got confused there. My bad. We'll go over the threshold and everything in a different video. It's kind of hard to explain everything at once to condense it. Just remember that this is a certain threshold value. If you guys are really curious, I think it's actually more around like negative 30 millivolts. Yeah, that seems a bit more like it, but don't take my word for it. That's not important for this video. What's important is that you understand how the signal is transmitted. So the action potential, what it actually does is it's basically like once the threshold is reached, it spikes to 150 millivolts. So what happens is that electrical signal will travel the length of this axon and reaches the axon terminals, where it will continue that entire process that we saw up here, right? So an action potential is an activation and carry through of a current, of an electrical current. So, an action potential is essentially how your brain processes all the information that it receives and how it actually even thinks, right? It takes the collective sum of all the inputs, decides whether it should fire or not, and depending on whether it fires, it releases an action potential, which is sent to another neuron, and it continues the process until an action happens or until the desired outcome is reached. Or it may just be sending another signal, right? It may send a signal that tells another neuron to fire or another neuron to not fire. So that whole cycle repeats over and over again until you reach your final outcome. And so let's take a quick recap here. First, the different parts of a neuron. We have our small dendritic branches, which act as microphones to hear and listen for signals, reach out, make connections, and to transmit information. Then you have your dendrites, which are basically these large structures which branch out to actually 50 or 100 different neurons and reach out to them and receive information from them with the help of dendritic branches. So that's dendrite or a dendrite. Dendrite, sorry. Dendrite, dendrocyte. I'm not sure if dendrocyte is a word. I don't know why I said that, but dendrite, or I think I've heard of dendrocyte before. So yeah, that could possibly work. But yeah, and then you have your cell body, which takes all the input of signals, adds them together, and decides, oh, should I fire or should I not fire? Once it decides, you have your axon. So your axon basically propels or sends the electrical current through. I actually forgot to quickly talk about these structures. If you watched my video previously on the glial cells, you'll recognize these as oligodendrocytes, or betterly phrased, Malin sheets. So you can see the nucleus of the oligodendrocytes here. And basically what they do is they make the signal which is going down the axon go faster, right? And then it reaches the axon terminals, which basically transmit information, right? It sends information to the next dendritic branch, and so on and so forth. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching my video. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'll leave my email down in the description below because YouTube does not allow my videos to be commented on. But yeah. Also, if you guys need any resources, I'll be linking the link to my Google Drive and my website in the description below. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'll actually be making a post today or tomorrow with the link to my drive and the website and so on and so forth. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.